Oops. It gives you the option.
Okay.
We're live.
Mine's not showing up here for whatever reason. I don't know why.
Okay. Well,
there it goes. That was strange.
Welcome to
Hello.
Crete. Yeah. So as I'm typing in information online, there's a button that changes us from the cover image to live, and it's number 1 and 2, and I use those numbers, so it automatically shifted us a couple of times. Welcome. So that's why Jack wasn't ready for us to be on, because he didn't know we were on.
Yeah.
But now we are. So, Jack, I'll let you take it away as the
Yeah,
host.
for some reason my computer's not loading up the video, and I can't see the comments.
If you had a PC, it wouldn't be happening.
Are you sure? That's
I'm not sure. I can't back
issue?
that up.
I'm blaming Facebook. So
It's convenient.
Mark Zuckerberg can come get me if he wants to. But hello, welcome to Deleted Scenes. We are talking about self-control this afternoon, and that is from the most recent sermon that Pastor Matt shared on our brand new sermon series called Back Together. Just talking about the art of reconciliation. Just talking about the art of reconciliation,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. Previous, also considered title, Reunited, and It Feels So Good. Did not go with that one, but considered it.
I bet you did consider it.
Then I would have to sing. Actually, my oldest brother, the one who got me hooked on Rubik's Cubes, he suggested it.
Yeah,
so.
That makes sense.
Yep.
There you go. He seems to kind of have the nostalgia for, what is that, like 80s and stuff like that. That's a little bit older, not like super old.
I was nostalgia or just trying to get me to be goofy.
Or that too.
Yeah.
Do you really have to try that hard though? I mean,
I usually have to use self-control to suppress it.
Okay, that makes sense.
See how I brought that around?
Hey, self-control. So yeah, we're talking about self-control this afternoon, and man, what a topic that is to talk about.
Yep.
It's really difficult. I think sometimes I feel weird like being a pastor because there's still like things that I struggle with, and that, like people are looking to you as to be the leader in certain things, and like talking about a topic like self-control is like, haha, I still struggle with things in terms of self-control. So that's a very interesting conversation to have. So anyway.
But if I never talked about things that I struggle with, I would never have anything to preach about.
That's true.
So
that is true. And part of being a Christian is having grace for people, and that includes your pastors. So
yes.
Well, without further ado, so the way this is going to work is I have several questions for Pastor Matt from this most recent sermon. Any questions that you have, you can ask in the comments section, and we'll get to those as soon as we can. So if you have questions, seriously, like comment them, and we'll talk about them, and it'll be a good time. So.
Indeed, sir.
Yes, and he's doing the Rubik's Cube as we speak now.
I'm demonstrating poor self-control.
Yeah.
Right now.
You got to put that at the front of the table so you don't do it.
I want to be able to solve it with the green side out for the green screen effect.
Oh, yeah.
That's the main thing that's bugging me.
That'd be strange.
But I'm working on my ability to do this while talking, so maybe this will be good practicing for the sermon if I do this while I already messed it up.
I mean, eye contact with the viewers, right?
Yeah, eye contact.
All right, so the first question I have for you kind of stems from what you were talking about at the beginning of your sermon, kind of the introduction of it, talking about what has jumbled up the Rubik's Cube, what has made it look like this, that's all the colors are every which way, and, just life in general, COVID happening, the fires happening, all these different things, the ice storms, fire and ice, wow, within like the span of just like 6 or so months. But all these things that just happen, and we're chaotic and we're crazy, and even the things that are in our personal lives that are crazy and chaotic. And so I just wanted to ask you, how do we slow down and calm our hearts in these times that just seem so chaotic? And it seems as though there's just things happening one right after another and just all around us. How do we slow down and calm our hearts in those times?
Talking about giving advice as a pastor on things you're still figuring out yourself. I guess if I were to give something that comes out of the series we're doing right now, and this is actually a good metaphor. When you look at a Rubik's Cube, it can be overwhelming to try and just say, I know how to fix that. Because I just recently heard this. You can solve any Rubik's Cube in under 20 moves, technically. But if you were to try to figure out not just like what is the first of those 20 moves and trying to get that done, it's too hard. Especially since there are billions of alternatives of mixes. So instead, what you do, rather than getting overwhelmed by figuring out all the 20 steps and everything exactly what you need to be doing 20 steps from now, you focus on the first thing. You just focus on the behaviors that Scripture teaches us, and you focus on the way Scripture teaches us to react to things, and just like what's in front of me right now. What do I need to deal with in the moment? And let God worry about what's 20 steps away. I just got to figure out how to put together the bottom layer. I got to figure out how to deal with the first step. I got to figure out how to get through today, and just take it one step at a time. Because there have been numerous points. For me, the pandemic has been at its most stressful when I'm thinking about the whole scale of it, and when I think about the fact that we probably won't be able to worship without masks until 2022 at the earliest, maybe 2023. I don't know. But I don't think this year we'll be worshiping without masks. So when I think about that scale, I get stressed and worried. But when I focus on what are we going to do this summer, what are we going to do this Sunday, I get really excited about those things, and I can handle that bite, that chunk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the large topics in your sermon this past Sunday was the Island of Crete.
Yes.
And so I just want to start off by talking a little bit about their culture.
Yes.
Because their culture was kind of a negative one.
Yes.
And so I first want to start off with this question. How do we use the word Cretan today?
This is funny. This is interesting. So if you're like me, the word Cretan sounds like an insult. Like in the back of your head, it's an insult. Don't know why, but it's like, what a Cretan. And you were talking about feeling like a phrase like lying like a Cretan or something
I've
like
just
that.
heard people say you're lying like a Cretan or something like that before.
So the verse in Paul or in Titus that says like Cretans are all liars, evil gluttons, lazy, and it's this pretty severe insult, and that comes from actually Greek culture. He's quoting a Greek person, and that made it into Scripture. Like that, it's. I would hate to be a Cretan, just because like their worst moment got sealed in Scripture forever.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yep.
But the funny thing is, and so it got brought into our language, not just from being in the Bible. It actually came to the way we talk every day through Looney Tunes. Because Looney Tunes, the old comic or the old cartoons would use biblical references in them because they were more common back then.
Yeah.
And so they would call each other Cretans. And because it's in cartoons, it's stuck around. There's another one of those that is a word that has completely switched meanings because of Looney Tunes. Mm-hmm. Nimrod.
Okay.
Nimrod is an insult, right?
Yes, it's also a town in Oregon.
So to call someone Nimrod, a Nimrod, is, we think, calling them an idiot. I just heard about this like last week on the Bible Project podcast. The reason why a Nimrod is an idiot is because it comes from the Bible. In Genesis, in one of the genealogies, there's a guy named Nimrod, and he's such a great hunter that his name came to be a reference for great hunters. So people would say, if you're a really great hunter, you're a Nimrod. So it was supposed to be a positive thing.
Yeah, it's supposed to be a good thing.
But it's also something that Bugs Bunny sarcastically called Elmer Fudd in the cartoons.
Ah, okay.
He would call him Nimrod,
specifically
because Elmer Fudd was not a mighty hunter.
Yeah.
So it was originally a hunting reference, and it got turned into just a generic insult because people who didn't understand the background just heard him calling him a Nimrod and thought it was an insult. Same thing happened with Cretan. At least Cretan kept the same meaning.
Yeah. I wonder how the town in Oregon called Nimrod got its name. Maybe they were just all good hunters, and so we're like, hey, we're the town of Nimrod.
Well, they probably named it after the biblical character.
Or that, too.
Before it turned into an insult.
Yeah. So, because I've always wondered, like, why would you call your town Nimrod as you're driving through it? Because that's one of the ones that's on, I think it's on the way to the mountains down south a little bit, I think, anyway. So, next question I have for you kind of still involves this idea of the culture of Crete, but I want to more look at our culture. And so you talked about how the Cretan church was infected by the local culture. And so I want to ask, how can the American church, how is it infected maybe by some of the negative sides of the American culture?
I mean, you could make a list as long as your arm in any church in any culture is going to get infected with the things that we bring with us when we become Christians. I would say the most prominent one to me in American culture is individualism. This focusing on like individual rights and the individual at the expense of every other level of society. It is a very recent, unique perspective, and it just did not exist really in ancient cultures or even medieval or early modern cultures. We just have this idea that it's all about me, that everything is about my rights and my individual, and we've even done that with salvation. To say that salvation is about me. I get saved as an individual, and we take that for granted. The truth is that's not really how the Bible talks about it. And there are some places where the Bible's approach to salvation challenges ours, because there are places where people seem to get saved by the family, right? Like in groups of families. So they'll take an entire family and baptize them, and they all become Christians. Even though we would say, God doesn't have grandchildren. Everybody has to make an individual choice, which I agree with. But even the whole logic of the salvation story is the idea that God uses a small group, a small elect to save the whole. And there's all these relationships that matter.
Yeah.
And why would Jesus's death and resurrection matter to me if we're all individuals? It's because we're not all individuals. And so much of what gets distorted in the way we present the gospel and the way we choose our values in the American church, it's distorted because we think of everything on an individual basis. That it's all about the one person. Their community doesn't matter, or there's every person is an island to be treated individually.
Sure.
And the idea that you could be a Christian and not be involved in church,
Yeah.
it was only even possible to think of in our culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So don't forget, you can comment any questions that you have for Pastor Matt in the comments section. My next question kind of comes from this idea of self-control. I feel kind of happens after a time of being tempted, right? Because it's like you have these two options, and you can go with the principles of the gospel or your desires. And so I wanted to ask: is it actually a sin to be tempted? Is temptation actually a sin?
No.
And could you explain why it's not?
No.
I mean, there's no.
Yeah.
And then,
Well, so Jesus was tempted.
mm-hmm.
And I think that when it says Jesus was tempted, it doesn't just mean he was put in a situation that would have tempted other people. Like we read the story of the temptation of Jesus and we think that it's just this, that Jesus is completely resilient and just stone-faced, nothing ever actually tempts him.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, those things would have tempted a normal person, but Jesus proved they didn't tempt him. Well, that's not tempting. That's not testing. Mm-hmm. There was a reason why Jesus would have wanted to behave in certain ways in the short term. He would have had that pull. And so it is completely natural for us to want things to be easy, for us to want our appetites to be satisfied. It's no more wrong to be tempted than it's wrong to be hungry. Now, the power of those temptations and the power of your hunger can be affected by the way you feed those appetites. Mm-hmm. Whether you are tempted can often be a result of choices that you've made that put yourself in those situations. So there is a way in which we can be held responsible for how we're tempted. But the fact that you're tempted by something is not the sin issue. The issue is, what do you do with that temptation? How do you respond to that temptation? And then the final aspect of that is there does seem to be a sense in which temptations are weakened by refusal. Mm-hmm. As we resist temptation, the more you resist the same temptation, the less powerful it becomes. I don't think it ever necessarily goes away, but it becomes less powerful.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So my next question is kind of a two-part question here. And the first part of this question is, why is it so difficult to talk about self-control? And two, why might we kind of, as we get later on in our lives, the self-control topic seems to come up kind of less and less? Because I remember as a child, self-control is like talked about all the time, right? And it's kind of talked about in the simple terms of, Jack, don't talk in class. Heard that one a lot. Don't move around so much in your seat, things like that. Practice self-control. But then as you get older, that topic seems to kind of be talked about less and less. So why might you think that is?
That is a very interesting question. I think it's because that's one of those places where you start to see the breakdown of our culture of individualism. Because whenever you teach kids virtues that you don't teach adults, or you don't emphasize in adults or expect of adults, I feel like that shows a problem. Mm-hmm. That's an inconsistency. Because what happens when we teach children, there's no way around it. You have to teach children how to function together, mm-hmm. because adults have to be able to manage them. And so we instill in them, hopefully, disciplines and values that make it possible for them to live together and to get along and those kinds of things. We teach them to share. We teach them to take turns. We teach them to be quiet and all those things. But we are so dedicated to putting the individual above everything else that when you get to a certain point, you're an individual, and now we wouldn't dare tell you have to do that because it's up to you. It's your choice to behave that way or not, because we don't want to have collective values. We don't want to have collective ideals. There was a time when self-control was all people talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And there were high expectations for how you behaved. Now, obviously, there were excesses. There have been excesses in history in those in terms of the social pressure that people lived under and the way they were ostracized if they stepped out. There's obviously excesses there. But we have gone excessively the other way, where the worst thing I could do was tell you to be self-controlled and tell you how to handle your own behavior, your own morality, your own sex life, your own, like, that would be the worst thing that I could do. And so we don't talk about it until people ask us for help.
Yeah.
A psychiatrist will talk about self-control. A therapist will talk about self-control. But if you don't ask for it, I should never tell you to control yourself.
And even now with those professions, it kind of seems to be in a roundabout way that they talk about self-control. Right there. I mean, in some ways, they're not allowed to tell people this is how you ought to act. This is how it should be. And so they kind of have to take a back door in. And so I find that interesting about how society has kind of shifted in, like, at least American society. So
yeah, absolutely.
All right, so I have a few more questions here, so don't forget that you can comment any questions that you have for Pastor Matt in the comments section. My next question for you is, how do we practice self-control when we are not sure of the right decision or the right direction that we are supposed to go in?
I think that depends on the situation, obviously, but I think one thing that we need to practice in self-control is not acting.
Okay.
You know how for a lot of people, and I'm one of them, you feel the need if there's a gap in a conversation to fill it, or if you're not sure what to say, you have this powerful urge to say something. You know, sometimes you'll ask me a question in these and I'll just, okay, well, let me talk about it long enough to circle around to something because I need to say something. I think that we don't, and the same thing with actions. We feel like I need to do something, even though I don't know what to do. And I think we need to rediscover the power of not saying anything and not doing anything until you know what needs to be said or done. Now, obviously, there are situations where you have to act in the moment. You've got to react.
Yeah.
But I think that some of the best decisions I've made has been to not say what popped into my head.
Sure.
Or to not try and fix the situation right now.
Yeah.
And to give it time.
Yeah. I think that gets complicated sometimes, and taking a step back is definitely necessary. You know, I think about the political world in a lot of ways, and I feel as though that world gets more and more complicated as each day goes on. Because even now, you know, just take the two candidates for example, you know, Biden and Trump, and their policies are so drastically different, but their policies are also just so complicated sometimes, where it's like, you know, you might agree partially with what Biden says, but also partially with what Trump says. And so you're like, well, which decision do I make? And so then taking a step back and or which policy do I support is really difficult sometimes. And, you know, making that decision is really, really hard. Especially
since our main way of participating is not to support or oppose individual policies. It's to support or oppose parties and members of parties. And that means that you have to take one set of values or the other. And most likely, you actually agree with some things in both sides. You may agree with more things, but there's no way for you to say, okay, I agree with this set of policies and this set of policies, so I want those. I find that my social media page my Facebook is pretty limited. I don't post on it very often, and it's mainly because I try and follow that policy of, if you're not sure, don't say it. You know, I constantly want to comment on things that are going on in the church or in politics or things like that, and I think, is this actually going to help me build the kingdom? Is this actually going to help me draw people to Christ? I have yet to find the political issue. Very rarely do I find a political issue or a social issue that is worth hanging my hat on, and, you know, putting that out there as a barrier for people to talk to me.
Social media is one of those wild ones, and, you know, that's where people got to be careful. Even today, I saw on Facebook this coach. I think he was a college coach somewhere, talking about how, you know, we see what you like, what you post, and what you say on social media to like recruits.
Mm-hmm.
And, he said we've dropped 15 recruits this year just because of what we've seen them posting or commenting or liking on their social medias. And just, that's such a dangerous territory. And
Yep.
I typically just post about sports because I feel like, it's kind of a easy one. I mean, people get, kind of heated over that, but I mean, it's not like, it's not like politics or religion or things like that where people will be very, very upset with you, like legitimately.
Yeah.
So,
unless you like the Yankees.
or
And you're
that,
not
I
from
don't
New
know.
York.
I mean, my grandfather likes the Yankees, so I've never liked the Yankees, but I can't really say that I hate them because of my grandfather. So
It's fair.
I don't know. I have respect for him and love for him. All right, so remember you can comment any questions you have for Pastor Matt. Do have just a few more here. Number 7, or whatever question this is, 7, 8, something like that. Does choosing the gospel mean that we never have satisfaction in our lives, or at the very least have rarely have it?
So I think that when you choose the gospel ahead of your own satisfaction, you will only get satisfaction when it lines up with the gospel, which means one of two things. For a while, you might end up being deeply dissatisfied in a lot of areas of your life. Ultimately, if you continue that long enough, hopefully what satisfies you will change.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we get backwards in our culture about self-control is that we think that what I want is innate in me. It defines me. My desires, my appetites define me. And so to be the most genuine me, I should pursue whatever I already want. Mm. The truth is that your wants can be affected by your behavior. Your appetites can be affected by your behavior. Now, there are obviously some things that we can't change just by willpower. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to be taken that way, that I think that I'm saying, you can change anything you want if you try hard enough. Obviously, I'm not trying to make a case for like conversion therapy and stuff like that. But there is a tremendous sense in which we are not defined by what we already want, but by how we prioritize the things that we want. Because you can choose which of your principles or desires you're going to satisfy.
Yeah.
And so I think every person has a part of them that wants what the gospel wants. And the question is, which part are you going to feed? And as you starve the parts of yourself that want revenge and want, power and domination over other people, you're also feeding the parts of you that are satisfied with compassion and are satisfied by doing good for others.
Yeah. Yeah.
And those parts grow, and those ultimately are what are more satisfying.
Yeah.
The only way you can be satisfied is by domination and control and revenge. At a certain point, those principles are going to fail. Mm-hmm. There are a few people in history who died with a sense of being in complete control of their lives and dominating the world around them. But if you are able to be satisfied by love and compassion, those are always within reach.
Yeah.
Anyone can love and be compassionate and ultimately be satisfied in what God has designed us for.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was reading this article one time that was talking about just personal satisfaction, how to be happier. And it was from a totally secular point of view. And one of the things that they talked about was serving. And they said you should serve because it makes you feel good. And I thought, I often do feel good when I serve, but I don't feel like that should be my motivation, is to go serve because it makes me personally feel good. Mm-hmm. I feel like that's kind of backwards in our thinking, but I just found that interesting because I think they even said this is one of the things that the church, one of the few things that the church gets right in that article. And I was like, well, interesting. I guess thank you, but that's not our motivation. Is it makes us feel good. So
I would say, and I think that's where they get it wrong. I don't think Christians serve because it feels good. I think they serve until it feels good. Mm-hmm. That's what we're supposed to do. We serve even when it doesn't feel good, and eventually what feels good changes.
Yeah.
So that you recognize this is more important than how I was planning on spending my Saturday.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah. All right, last couple questions here. Hopefully you have some time to comment any questions you might have. So second to last question, what might be some difficult things that Paul would tell us to have self-control in today?
You know, I like this question because the list of things that Paul really emphasizes for self-control is not necessarily what we would talk about. Mm-hmm. His priorities are not the same as ours. Because in the church, what we mostly prioritize for conversations about self-control is sexual behavior. Mm-hmm. Now, Paul cares about sexual behavior. He cares about self-control in the arena of sex. But he spends a lot more time talking about the way we speak to each other. Yeah. There's a passage in Colossians chapter 3, where he starts out by saying, like, the first level, he says, you know, you need to take off your old self that does all these things, and he lists a lot of them are sexual things. Mm-hmm. And he says, and those you have taken off, but you're not done yet, because you also need to deal with all these other things. And they're things like slander and malice and hatred and all these things that we are not as good at condemning in the church. And it's amazing to me, Paul spends a lot more time condemning the way we talk about other people. And I have definitely heard people do that kind of thing from the pulpit. I have never seen sexual immorality from the pulpit. But I have seen that kind of sin from the pulpit. And there was one time that I walked out, and I was the only one. And actually, there are ways in which nowadays you can draw people to your church by talking that way. Yeah. So I think that the way we talk about each other and to each other is the biggest place where Paul would say we need to get it under control. Yeah. And we're going to talk, not this Sunday, but next Sunday, about what Paul has to say about when we deal with people we disagree with. And it's very different from what a lot of people think Paul tells us about the people we disagree with. Yeah. Now, Paul loses his composure. There's at least one place where he says that he wishes the circumcision party would castrate themselves. Mm-hmm. So he gets frustrated with them. But he still says, you know, we need to control the way we talk about others. Yeah. And there's a rhetorical reason why he says that. Yeah, yeah. But it is funny.
You know, you bringing up that idea of, you know, in some ways how we talk about people can actually like attract certain people to our church. You know, one of the things that we've been going through on Sunday mornings and Tuesday evenings is the Unity Project. Mm-hmm. And there was this idea put out there, you know, of, you know, there's a lot of people that you know, you go to a church where the people are a lot like you, and you kind of end up at this church where all these people are very similar. And I feel as though that can kind of start from the pulpit and how someone's talking about maybe certain people or certain topics and how they portray certain things. You know, people say, I agree with that. I'm going to this church, and it never really challenges them to be stretched out of their comfort zone just because they go just to hear what they already think and what they already agree with. And so... Mm-hmm. I think that can be a great danger to the church sometimes. I mean, especially even us personally, if we're not being stretched and challenged in our ideas and how we think. So,
yeah, there's a way I've noticed there's a similarity being a new pastor and a new dad. There is a similarity in that, you know, with your kids, they will say what you say. Mm-hmm. The words you say will come out of their mouth. Yeah. And
like Reese's.
Yeah. It's Reese's Pieces.
Reese's Pieces.
They are pieces that belong to Reese. Thank you very much.
Or Reese. We don't know what his full name. I mean, how you pronounce his name.
We do know how you pronounce the name.
It could have been Reese.
It's not an uncommon name. It has a known
Maybe it was an uncommon name, and they just said we're going to name him Reese this time.
That's not how you would spell Reese. That would be Reesie.
I've seen some really, you know, weirdly spelled names that are like.
Yeah, but that's not how they name candy.
I guess not.
Anyway, what was I talking about?
Your son and your kids.
So the things you say to your kids will come out of their mouths, right?
Yes.
Like they will say those things. And there's another sense in which, as a preacher, the things you say from the pulpit are what will are statistically they've said are often the most important things for people deciding whether they will fit in your church. That means that the things I say from the pulpit have a powerful effect on the makeup of our congregation.
Yeah.
So that if I am saying really divisive things, then we're going to end up with the people who will be drawn to that will be divisive, and the people who are not divisive will be pushed away. And so I try to work at that a lot and keep that in mind, that what I say tells people a lot, whether it should or not. It tells people a lot about who our church is and who we want to be and who we want to be here.
Yeah.
And so I try not to ever insult people or put people down from the pulpit, because I don't want that. I don't ever want to have somebody come in and hear a sermon and say, "Oh, well, then I'm not wanted here." You know, even if they disagree with something I'm saying.
I think that's just a general way that we should hold ourselves, like in all of life too. Especially in an influential role like a pastor from the pulpit, you want to make sure you're mindful of what you're saying. And, even sometimes when someone has said something by mistake and they didn't really intend to say it the way they said it, because they could fully well mean like a really good thing and they just say it in the wrong way and it sounds just absolutely terrible, so we just have to make sure that we're mindful about how we're actually saying things too.
Yeah.
Well, we come to my final question here. So this is the time for you to comment your questions in the comment section here. And so this last point that you shared with your sermon says that reconciliation is a discipline. It requires time, effort, and intention. And so I just wanted to ask you, how can we intentionally improve in our self-control? Like, what are some actual action and application steps that we can take to improve in our self-control?
I think that there are some things that you can do. Self-control, I think it's an act of the will. It's a decision that you make. So on a certain level, you just have to do it. You just have to decide. But I think what that means is the way you develop that is you spend time thinking about what are my values, what is important, what are the principles that I'm meant to follow, and also look back at decisions you've made and the consequences. Like one of the things that I've done that has been helping me with dieting is to actually think through, like, I ate this thing and I lost self-control and it had a bad effect on my diet. What would have happened if I had not eaten that thing? Like Casey and I talked about this. Like, I have never regretted not eating a candy bar. I have regretted eating a candy bar. Sure. And to check that math afterward and kind of put that in my head to remind me that following through on or giving into that appetite doesn't actually make me happier in the long run. It doesn't actually get me where I want to go. I think the more you think about that and remind yourself of that and dwell on that, the more powerful that reminder will be when you're faced with that next candy bar and you realize, wait a minute, I remember how much I hated the effect of this. Yeah. Or like if you're dealing with a gluten allergy, cutting out gluten can be hard. But if you remember how sick it makes you feel, you're like, oh, never mind, I don't want it anymore. Yeah. Right. I think that's part of what we have to do is just continue to dwell on our principles and what the actual consequences of our behavior really are.
Sure. All right. Well, I do not see any questions in the comments section, so that concludes all of my questions, and so I guess that would conclude Deleted Scenes for the day. We really thank you for tuning in, and if you watch this at a later point in the week or whenever you watch it, thanks for watching this video. I'm glad to have you. Hope some of this was beneficial to you and insightful to you. We should be right back here next Thursday at 3 in the p.m. Sorry. It's one of those shows that I watched as a kid that made me like, so if you've ever seen The Secret Life or The Sweet Life of Zach and Cody.
Yes.
In one of the episodes, they're sitting in the car and Mr. Mosby is trying to teach London how to drive a car, and she calls the park reverse, that thing, the Prindle, because it's park reverse, neutral, drive, and low. And then he talks to them about the radio station. Would you like M or Fum? And I just always remember that. Now I say Pum. And yeah, anyway.
That was a long way of saying.
That was completely irrelevant information, but I hope that it made you laugh. So join us next week as we talk about the next sermon that Matt is talking about. So
not we, though.
I'll be here.
Will you?
I'll be
yeah,
here on
okay.
Thursday.
That's right. You're not gone that long.
Hopefully.
Okay.
So,
Lord willing.
I mean, I have half of my COVID vaccine, and then I'm traveling, and I get back, and if I'm not sick, then I'll be here.
Yeah.
So
cool.
Yeah.
And we'll be talking about love.
We love
What
each other.
is love?
Oh,
baby, don't hurt me. Sorry. Anyway, I promise not to do that during the sermon.
That's so iconic.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
anyway,
brotherly love, physical attraction love.
Just love within marriage, because we're in 1 Corinthians 13, and all that has to do with is marriage. That's why they read it at weddings. We'll just have to find out on Sunday.
One of the things we talked about earlier is the things that I'm finding out that frustrate him, and there's things that he'll probably end up finding out that frustrate me. Some scriptures out of context really annoy me. So
yeah.
Anyway,
we'll talk about Jeremiah 29 later.
All right.
All right.
Reese's, go get some. Right. Reese's Pieces.
You are evil.
Or a Reese's Blizzard. That's my favorite Blizzard. What's your favorite Blizzard?
Reese's.
Reese's.
All right. Anyway, we need to get going.
Have a good day.
Stay healthy, stay hopeful, and go in peace to love and serve the Lord.
You guys are great.
Bye.